Hi guys, Olive here. Here today with my fall book haul. Per usual, I've been accumulating books at a pretty steady pace over the past few months. I go to a lot of library book sales. If you follow me on Instagram, then you probably have seen me posting about going to those. But books are so affordable there that it's hard not to pick up each and every book that appeals to you. I've been trying to not get quite as many, even if they are affordable, but I still have accumulated quite a few books. Also during different travels I've taken over the past few months. If I'm in a city, I will also try to find a used bookstore to go and explore. So I got some books that way too. I've accumulated a nice big stack of books that I haven't shown you yet. So I pulled all the ones that feel the most autumnal, and I thought I would share those with you today. I'm going to start off by showing you all the fiction books in this haul first, because they do represent the minority of books in this book haul. Of course, this being one of my book hauls, it is dominated by nonfiction. But we will start with fiction, talk about those first. And the first book I want to show you is a book I already owned a copy of, but it's a copy that I didn't like. So I have been waiting to get an edition that has this cover. It's White Oleander by Janet Fitch. If you followed my Trash My Bookshelves project last year, then you may know that I own a paperback edition of this, but it's the movie tie-in cover, and I'm normally not picky about that, but there's just something about that specific cover that I don't like. So I have been looking at every book sale I've gone to, every used bookstore I've entered. I've been looking out for a used edition that has this cover. This is the cover that I wanted, and I finally found it. So I can sell my paperback to my used bookstore and enjoy this one instead. I have been meaning to read this for such a long time. It's about a young woman who gets shuffled between various foster homes. Up next is Nick by Michael Farris Smith. And as the cover may give away, this is a Great Gatsby retelling, or actually it's more of a prequel. It focuses on Nick Carraway, of course, and his life before the events of The Great Gatsby. As a fan of Gatsby, I've been really looking forward to reading this book. I cannot believe I found this nice of a copy at a library book sale. This next one is a new release from an author who I really like. It's called The Young Accomplice by Benjamin Wood. This book is about a brother and a sister who are both working as apprentices at an architectural practice in 1952, and everything is going swimmingly until a shady character from their past shows up. I loved his previous book, The Ecliptic. It is still a book I think about all the time, so I'm really looking forward to reading this. I was really happy to find this next one at a library book sale again. In fact, it may have been the same library book sale that I found Nick at, now that I think about it. But this one had a moment of being a BookTube darling a few years back. It's Tin Man by Sarah Winman. This book is about two teenage boys. They're best friends, but then they start to feel more for one another. Fast forward to their adulthoods. One of them is married to a woman, and the other one is nowhere to be found, begging the question, what happened? I'm so excited that I finally own this one. I finally get to find out what all the fuss was about a couple of years ago. And this cover, I thought it was so autumnal and gorgeous. Another autumnal looking book I picked up is Cider with Rosie by Lori Lee. And this book is a memoir. It's not actually fiction, but I wanted to sneak it in here really quickly. This is the author's atmospheric account of her early 20th century childhood spent in a small English town. This one sounded so charming, I just couldn't resist it. But back to fiction. A viewer of this channel in the comment section of one of my videos gave me the heads up about this next book, and I'm glad they did because I had no idea this book even existed. It's Caribou by Meg Wolitzer. This is a YA book by Meg Wolitzer, and in it we follow a teenage girl in 1970. Her older brother, with whom she's extremely close, is drafted, and she has to go about figuring out how to still be a teenager while knowing that her brother is off fighting. I don't know how this deep backlist book escaped my attention for so long. I thought I knew every single book that Meg Wolitzer ever wrote. I've read all of her adult books. I now think I should probably go through and read all of her YA books. So thank you so much for letting me know about this one. I'm very curious to see what it's like. But then I picked up two used copies of books that I read and reviewed last year. These are two books that I really enjoyed. I know I'm going to want to reread them at some point, so owning my own copies sounded like a good idea. First, there's Matrix by Lauren Groff. This is about an abbess at an impoverished abbey who has divine visions and who is also focused on growing her power. And Mrs. March, which is about the wife of a famous novelist who begins to slowly lose her mind after she becomes convinced that her husband based a vile character in his new novel on her. I will link my reviews of both Matrix and Mrs. March in the description box below if you want to hear what I thought of these. Speaking of previous reviews, I also picked up a book from an author who I've previously reviewed their work before. I got Atrib and Other Stories by Ellie Williams. I read and reviewed her novel, which was called The Liar's Dictionary, for Harvard Review, and I really enjoyed it. I've heard great things about this collection as well, and I've been trying to get more into short stories. It's not been an easy process, but I figured if I pick up collections from authors whose work I know I've enjoyed in the past, then that might help me through this process. And I had a similar thought when I decided to get Draw Your Weapons by Sarah Centillas. Her latest book is a memoir called Stranger Care, and it was one of my favorite nonfiction books of last year. So that made me very curious to pick up this book, which she put out a few years ago. Apparently, this is a genre-bending work of nonfiction all about the power of art, which gives me just the perfect opportunity to now tell you about some of the art books that I've picked up recently. I got The Art Forger by B.A. Shapiro. This is a novel about one of the paintings that was stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. It's being replicated in secret, but then that stolen painting itself is suspected of being a forgery. And since I just mentioned Isabella Stewart Gardner, I should also tell you that I got a biography of her called Mrs. Jack by Louise Hall Tharp. I was lucky enough to get to go visit her former home, which is now a museum in Boston. It was beyond wonderful, and I have wanted to learn more about her ever since I visited. It seems like she was an art-loving live wire. Since the portrait on the cover of that biography I just showed you was painted by one of Isabella's friends, John Singer Sargent, next I thought I would show you John Singer Sargent and his muse, Painting Love and Loss by Karen Corsano and Daniel Willemin. This book is about John Singer Sargent's life, but it's also about his relationship with his niece, Rosemarie Ormond. But moving from art to literature, I picked up Chekhov, The Hidden Ground by Philip Kahlo. This is a biography of the Russian short story author and playwright. I very recently reread his final play called The Cherry Orchard in order to prepare myself to review a different book for Harvard. So I've had him on the brain recently, but I realized I don't know much about his life, so I'm eager to learn more. Another book I got about an author is called The Reason for the Darkness of the Night, Edgar Allan Poe and the Forging of American Science by John Tresh. In this book, the author talks about Edgar Allan Poe's obsession with science and how that influenced his work. But since we were just talking about science, let me now move into talking about all of the science and medical books that I've picked up recently, starting with The Royal Society and the Invention of Modern Science by Adrian Tenniswood, which talks about the establishment of the Royal Society in London in the mid-17th century and how it has helped to advance our understanding of science. But also I think this author talks about all of the petty dramas that these science nerds of yesteryear had with one another, and I'm here for it. I also got Blood and Guts, A Short History of Medicine by Roy Porter. This book tells the story of the establishment of modern medicine, surgery, and all the bumps in the road along the way. And I swear this book was almost worth buying exclusively for this wonderful and terrible illustration on the front. Another medical book I got, it's a slightly beaten up copy of this book. It's called Pump, A Natural History of the Heart by Bill Shutt. And as you can probably tell, this book is the history of the life-sustaining organ, not just in humans, but in other creatures as well. I read and reviewed his last book here on my channel a few years ago. It was A Natural History of Cannibalism. It was a surprisingly fun book to read, and I'm expecting more of the same here. Next up is The Education of a Coroner, Lessons in Investigating Death by John Bateson. The author of this book worked in a California coroner's office for 36 years of his career, first as a death investigator and then as the coroner. And in this book, he talks about various cases that he worked over the years. Some are sad, others are shocking. Sticking with this macabre theme we've got going on right now, I also picked up Gory Details, Adventures from the Dark Side of Science by Erica Engelhaupt. This is a collection of columns written by the science journalist for National Geographic, in which she discusses all things gross, morbid, and taboo. I cannot wait to read this one, and I just have to say, the design of this cover and all of the illustrations inside, perfection. Another book I picked up that would be perfect for spooky season is called The Witch of Lime Street, Seance, Seduction, and Houdini in the Spirit World by David Jeher. This book is about the rivalry that developed between the famous magician Harry Houdini and the wife of a prominent Boston surgeon who was a vocal proponent of the spiritualism movement, which meant communicating with the dead. It definitely had a big moment at the beginning of the 20th century. I had never heard of this rivalry before, but now I need to know more about it. This next book blends my love of natural history with my affection for all things spooky. This book is called Bats, A World of Science and Mystery by M. Brock Fenton and Nancy B. Simmons. This is an enormous, as you can see, coffee table type book all about bats, their behavior, their biology, and the conservation of bats. I love bats. I think they are beyond adorable. But then again, I'm someone who has a stuffed vulture sitting on a bookshelf behind me right now. So maybe that's just me. But the next book in this haul is also autumnal, but not in the spooky way. It's called Pumpkin, A Curious History of an American Icon by Cindy Ott. This is a cultural history of the famous squash that folds in some history of American farming as well. From what I've heard in Goodreads reviews for this book, it seems like, especially because this book was released by a university press, it does have more academic writing than some readers would have preferred, but I'm still really excited to get to this. Keeping with this same food and beverage theme that I'm developing right now, I also got a copy of Beyond the Pale, the story of Sierra Nevada Brewing Company by Ken Grossman. This is the story of the West Coast-based brewery from its founding in 1980 all the way up through the 2010s when this book was released. Now, this book was written by the owner of the company, so I am sure he will paint things in a more positive light than would any other author, but I am still interested to learn more about this brewery, and it would be great to read this while having one of these beers. I also got Uncommon Grounds by Mark Pendergrast. This is a history of coffee, from its discovery in Ethiopia to our modern love affair with Starbucks. I love coffee. I heard about this book, I think before I even joined BookTube, I think a few years before I joined BookTube, and I've wanted to read it ever since. So when I saw this copy, which is in really nice condition too, at a library book sale, I snatched it up. Next, I got two different books on Italian cuisine. There's Delizia by John Dickey, which is 1,000 years worth of Italian food history, and A Blissful Feast by Teresa Lust, which is a chef's account of her culinary adventures across Italy. I also got two more food memoirs. The first one is called A Tiger in the Kitchen, a memoir of food and family by Cheryl Lulian Tan. The author of this book grew up in Singapore. She moved to America at the age of 18. And by the time she was in her 30s, she noticed that she was really yearning for some of the dishes that she grew up eating. And so in this memoir, she describes her experience trying to recreate those dishes. And the other food memoir that I got is actually by a pastry chef. It's called Spiced by Dahlia Jurgensen. And in this book, she discusses her experience with kitchen politics, with love, and with creating some fabulous desserts. The next memoir that I picked up up looks and sounds like a food memoir, but it's actually not. It's called A Mountain of Crumbs by Elena Gorakova. The author of this book now lives in the US, but in this book she discusses her childhood and her early adulthood growing up in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg, in the 1960s and 1970s. It took me forever to finally find a used copy of this next book, but I found one. It is a very popular memoir called Uncanny Valley by Anna Weiner. In this book, the author discusses leaving New York City to enter the surreal world of startup culture in Silicon Valley. I feel like my background reading about Theranos and WeWork has definitely prepared me to go on this wild ride. And then the final book in this book haul is another extremely popular work of nonfiction that I was searching for my own used copy of for such a long time. I finally found one. It's Catch and Kill. And this is Ronan Farrow's story of investigating the accusations against Harvey Weinstein and the lengths to which the former producer went to silence Farrow. I have heard incredible things about this book. This is probably one I'm going to pick up in the very near future. So those are some of the books that I've picked up recently that I thought may be of interest to you. Some books that fit the season here in the Northern Hemisphere, other books that may give you some ideas for Nonfiction November coming very, very soon. If any of these books caught your attention, are of interest to you, you now want to read them, or if you've read any of these books and you have suggestions for me of where I should start with this massive pile of books, I would love to hear any or all of that down in the comment section below. All of the books that I showed you today will be linked for you in the description box below for your clicking convenience. And at the bottom of that exact same description box, you'll see links to everywhere you can find me around the internet, including Goodreads and Instagram, the two places where I'm the most active, in case you would like to keep up with what I am reading and writing about right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.